If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. Every day we bring emotional stories that can change the way you see life. Before we go any further, if you've ever watched someone love a child so fiercely it redefined what strength looks like, this story was written for you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever met a stranger who changed your child's life without saying a single word? And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You are not going to want to miss where this goes. The morning started the way most mornings started in the Calloway penthouse, with silence and the particular kind of tension that grows inside silence when it isn't chosen, but simply endured. Ethan Calloway stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, watching through the glass panel as his 6-year-old son sat alone at the breakfast table, hands folded in his lap, staring at a bowl of untouched oatmeal with the concentrated disdain of someone deeply offended by its existence. There was a smear of the same oatmeal on the marble backsplash behind him. There was, notably, no nanny. "That would be the third one this month, sir." Patrick appeared at Ethan's elbow with the practiced silence of a man who had learned in 18 months of employment that delivering bad news required the same neutral tone as delivering good news. Ethan responded poorly to either kind of theatrical presentation. "The agency is already sending a replacement. She arrives at 9. She," Ethan repeated. Not a question, just the word, flat and careful. The way he repeated any piece of information he intended to file and retrieve later. Clara Bennett, 27, 8 years in household service and childcare. 3 references, all Upper East Side families. Patrick paused. Unusual. Patrick did not pause. "There's something else in her file you should probably see before she arrives. I'll read it myself." Ethan pushed open the kitchen door. Noah looked up immediately. His dark eyes, the same near black as his father's, inherited in perfect precision while everything softer had apparently gone elsewhere, tracked Ethan's entrance with the focused, measuring attention that characterized everything his son did. Noah Calloway had been deaf since birth, diagnosed at 3 months with profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Every specialist in 3 states had reviewed the case. Every program, every technique, every experimental approach had been considered, attempted, and quietly set aside. Noah communicated in American Sign Language, in gestures that were somehow more expressive and precise than most people managed with full sentences, and had not produced a meaningful spoken word in 6 years of living. He had also, apparently, fired 3 nannies in a single month. Ethan crossed to the table and crouched to his son's level, signing, "Good morning. You're not eating." Noah signed back without hesitation, "The new one is coming today." "Yes." His son considered this the way he considered most things, with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had concluded long ago that rushing was a waste of perfectly good intelligence. Then, "Will she be loud?" "I don't know yet." The last one was loud. A brief pause. Then, with the devastating precision that 6-year-olds occasionally deployed without awareness of its effect, "Also, she smelled like artificial flowers." Ethan kept his face composed with considerable effort. "I'll note that in her departure paperwork." Noah looked unimpressed. He pushed the oatmeal approximately 1 centimeter further from himself, which appeared to constitute his final word on the morning. The intercom buzzed at 9 o'clock exactly. Ethan noted the punctuality without allowing himself to be impressed. Punctuality was a baseline, not a distinguishing quality. He pressed the gate release from the panel near the window and watched the small figure cross the courtyard below. Something about the way she moved made him pause with his hand still on the panel. She walked with an evenness, an unhurried quality, and she didn't look up at the building the way most visitors did. That involuntary tilting of the head, the brief adjustment of self-conception that happened when people registered the scale of where they were standing. She crossed the courtyard as if she had simply been told where to go and had gone there. Nothing more complicated than that. He filed this away without yet knowing why. Clara Bennett arrived in his kitchen 3 minutes later. She was younger than the file photo had suggested, or perhaps the photo had simply failed to capture the specific quality of alertness in her expression, the way she absorbed a room without appearing to perform the act of absorbing it. Her hair was light brown, clean and neat in a bun at the nape of her neck. She wore dark slacks and a slate gray blouse, carried a small canvas bag, and held her folded references in one hand with the specific casualness of someone whose paperwork is in order and who isn't particularly worried about proving it. She took in the kitchen, the oatmeal on the backsplash, the resistant 6-year-old at the table, the man in a $4,000 shirt holding a dish towel as if he'd forgotten what it was for, in approximately 2 seconds, and did not flinch. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'm Clara Bennett. I'm aware." He set the dish towel down. The agency sent your file. Then you know my background. She placed her references on the counter without waiting to be invited to. And I know yours. He looked at her with the particular patience he reserved for situations that hadn't yet declared their nature. Meaning you've had 14 household staff in 14 months. Your last 3 placements lasted between 1 and 3 weeks, and the agency classified this placement as high difficulty. She delivered this without any discernible edge, in the same tone a person might use to confirm a dinner reservation. I wanted to make sure we were starting from accurate information. Most people who walked into this apartment performed one of 2 things: elaborate enthusiasm at the evidence of his wealth, or quiet intimidation at the evidence of his reputation. This woman did neither. She stood in his kitchen and returned his directness to him like a serve, clean, unhurried, right back to his side of the court. Most candidates lead with their qualifications, he said. My qualifications are in the folder. You can read them at your convenience. A pause, measured to the precise length of something that wasn't quite sarcasm but was adjacent to it. The more useful question is whether you plan to tell me what actually happened with your previous staff, or whether you'd prefer I discover it independently. Something shifted in the room in a way he couldn't have articulated if pressed. My son is the reason, Ethan said. She nodded as if this confirmed something she had already considered. May I meet him? He gestured toward the table. She didn't perform a smile. She didn't adopt any of the special vocal registers, the artificially bright pitch, the slow and loud approach, that well-meaning but profoundly uninformed adults deployed around deaf children, as if volume were somehow the variable that mattered. She crossed the kitchen at a normal pace, set her bag on the empty chair beside Noah's, and crouched to his exact eye level with the ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times and found it entirely natural. She raised one hand, a small, unhurried wave. Nothing excessive, nothing performed. Noah watched her with the specific quality of attention he reserved for things that had not yet been categorized as safe or threatening. His dark eyes moved over her face, her hands, her posture. She waited. She did not try to fill the silence with expressions or gestures or helpful, encouraging sounds. She simply held his gaze with the patient steadiness of someone who understood clearly that the silence was his, not hers to fill. After 4 long seconds, Noah raised his hand and waved back. Ethan did not move. Clara glanced up at him briefly, the controlled, professional acknowledgement of a person noting relevant data, and then looked back at Noah and signed, "Hello, my name is Clara. What's yours?" The ASL was fluid, not textbook careful, not the deliberate, constructed movements of someone who had learned from a weekend workshop and felt good about it. This was language used by someone who actually lived inside it, whose hands moved the way a person's hands move when they're thinking in a language, not translating into one. Noah's eyes widened by a precise, contained fraction. He signed his name. Clara signed back. "Nice to meet you, Noah. That's a strong name." A pause. Then Noah, with the specific gravity of a person sharing important information. "You don't smell like artificial flowers." Clara received this, processed it for 1 full second, replied with perfect composure. "Good to know." Ethan cleared his throat. "The position is full-time live-in. My schedule requires early departure and late return. I don't micromanage, but I expect results and I expect honesty." "Understood." She straightened, smoothing her slacks. "What are Noah's current therapy arrangements?" "Speech therapy, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. He also sees a specialist at the Weiss Institute the first Friday of every month." Her expression remained neutral. Carefully, precisely neutral, in the specific way that absence of expression sometimes signifies more than expression does. "I'll need his full medical file to understand his routine properly," she said. "My assistant can send it." "Thank you." She picked up her bag. "Monday, 7 o'clock. She was at the doorway when Noah made a sound. Not a word, not quite. It was a vocalization, soft, high, deliberate, of the kind that existed somewhere between wanting to speak and not yet knowing how. Ethan had heard it perhaps 4 times in his son's entire life, each time in a moment of particular urgency or recognition. It was the sound Noah made when something mattered enough to try. Clara stopped. She turned back toward Noah, who had pushed back his chair and was looking at her with something that Ethan had no professional vocabulary for and could only describe, helplessly, as recognition, as if something in his son had identified something in this woman that 6 years of living hadn't given him language for yet. Clara looked at Noah for a long, quiet moment. Then she signed something fast and fluid. 2 or 3 movements, and waited. Noah's face opened. Not the polite, contained half-smile he gave therapists. Not the cautious, measuring assessment he gave strangers. The real thing. The unguarded, lit from the inside expression that Ethan spent a significant portion of his days quietly desperate to see. "Monday," Clara said to Ethan, and walked out with the same unhurried steps she'd arrived with. Ethan stood in the kitchen for 30 full seconds after the elevator closed, listening to his son hum softly to himself. A rare thing. A thing that only emerged when Noah was genuinely, unguardedly at ease, and tried to remember the last time a stranger had walked into his apartment and left his child looking like that. He couldn't. He went to find Patrick and ask, specifically, what had been in that file that Patrick had thought he should know. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. Every day we bring emotional stories that can change the way you see life. The flagged paragraph was at the bottom of the application, the kind of administrative footnote agencies appended without comment. Prior professional background includes graduate training in pediatric audiology and speech-language pathology. Left the field 2021. Currently seeking positions in household service and childcare. Ethan read it twice. Then he opened Noah's most recent specialist report, the one he kept in a locked folder on his laptop and reviewed occasionally, the way other men reviewed unpleasant financial projections, because reality was better faced directly than allowed to accumulate surprise. Patient demonstrates profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. No measurable response to pure tone audiometry at standard test frequencies. Cochlear implant candidacy reassessed. Not recommended at this time due to auditory nerve involvement. Prognosis for meaningful spoken language acquisition remains guarded. Continued ASL instruction recommended as primary communication modality. He closed the file. He opened Clara Bennett's application again. Left the field in 2021. She was 27 now. If she had left audiology 4 years ago at 23, she had barely completed her graduate training before departing. People did not walk away from specialized medical careers at 23 unless something significant had happened, something that was not, notably, listed in the application, and that the agency had apparently not pressed her on because they were filling a household service role, not a clinical one. He called Patrick in from the hallway. "Find out why she left audiology," he said. Patrick, who had learned that follow-up questions were generally not invited, said, "Yes, sir," and closed the door. Monday arrived with the gray, clear precision of late October in Manhattan. Ethan was at his desk at 6:45 on a call with a development team in Tokyo when he heard the elevator arrive at the penthouse level. He didn't break from the call. Through the office window, the apartment's open sightlines had been one of the architect's key selling points and one of Ethan's primary reasons for the purchase. He watched Clara cross the main hallway toward the kitchen with the same even, purposeful gait she'd had on Friday. She went directly to work. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:22. His morning ritual with new people was specific and had been consistent for years. He would observe from a calculated distance for between 4 and 8 minutes before deciding whether to approach. He would make his decision without any input from the adults present, and that decision, once made, was final and absolute. This morning, Noah stood in the kitchen doorway for 38 seconds. Then he walked to the table and sat down. Ethan ended his Tokyo call 5 minutes early. By the time he appeared in the kitchen doorway himself, Clara had placed a plate in front of Noah. Scrambled eggs, nothing elaborate, nothing with unfamiliar textures, and Noah was eating with the focused contentment of a child who had decided without ceremony that the morning was acceptable. Clara stood at the counter with a coffee mug and a small notepad, writing something, and looked up when Ethan arrived with an expression suggesting she had expected him at approximately this time. "There's coffee," she said. "I have coffee in my office." "Then you don't need to mention it." She returned to her notepad. He walked to the counter and poured himself a cup from her pot, which was noticeably better than the one in his office. He did not comment on this. "Noah's therapy schedule is on the shared calendar," he said. "I found it. Dr. Ames. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. A brief notation. What is the therapy's current focus? Communication strategies, ASL fluency development, some vocalization exercises, though progress there has been." He paused, selecting the word. "Limited." She wrote something. "How long has he been working with Dr. Ames?" 2 years. She looked up. Something crossed her face. A quick, controlled movement that he might have missed if he hadn't been watching with the specific attention that Clara Bennett, he was beginning to acknowledge, consistently provoked in him. And the Weiss Institute review. That's with Dr. Pendleton. He manages the cochlear implant question quarterly reviews. Has the implant recommendation been revisited recently? There was a precision to the question, an angle to it, that made him set down his coffee cup. The last review was 8 months ago. The recommendation hasn't changed. I see. She wrote a final note and closed the notepad. I'll need a copy of his most recent audiogram. The complete version with the raw frequency data, not just the summary report. Why? She met his eyes with the same steadiness she'd demonstrated on Friday, and he found again that it was more difficult to outstare than he would have expected. Because I work with him every day and I want to understand his situation fully. You said you expect results. She had used his own words back at him, cleanly, without apparent satisfaction. He noted this. Patrick will send it, he said. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. Every day we bring emotional stories that can change the way you see life. The first week arranged itself in small, unremarkable moments that had the specific quality of things that matter more than they appear to. Noah, who had spent 14 months treating household employees with the selective engagement of a senior executive reviewing unsatisfactory proposals, began appearing in whatever room Clara occupied. Not following her. Nothing so simple or readable as that. More like existing in her vicinity, which for a child of Noah's particular brand of self-containment represented something that Ethan's mother, calling on Wednesday evening, described as deeply concerning. She's a stranger, Ethan. She's been in the apartment for 3 days. All employees begin as strangers. She has no professional references from the past 4 years. The agency confirmed it. You don't find that troubling? Victoria Calloway had a lifelong talent for identifying the precise thread that, if pulled, would unravel the most carefully constructed piece of mind. The fact that she was, on this particular evening, identifying a thread that was genuinely worth examining did not make the exercise less irritating. I'm looking into it, he said. I spoke with Richard Harmon at the Weiss Institute. He says the Pendleton review is coming up and there are still no changes to recommend. You should be focusing on that, not on some girl with a mysterious resume. Good night, Mother. Diana called me incidentally. She's back from London. Diana can direct any communication about my son through my legal team, as she has been advised. She was simply asking, good night. He ended the call with the particular firmness of a man who had performed this maneuver many times and had yet to find a way to make it feel like anything other than a temporary solution to a structural problem. He sat for a moment in the quiet of his office. Then he opened his email and found Patrick's preliminary report on Clara Bennett. It was brief. Patrick had found the name of the program where she'd done her graduate training, the Harrington Institute for Pediatric Audiology, a private research institution attached to Columbia, and the date her enrollment had ended. But the reason for her departure was not publicly listed. No malpractice record, no license action, just a quiet, clean disappearance from a field she had apparently been, according to one archived academic mention Patrick had located, exceptionally talented in. The archived citation was from a 2020 conference program, a paper on auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder in early childhood, co-authored by 2 graduate researchers. Clara M. Bennett was listed second. Ethan read the title of the paper twice. Then he looked up ANSD, auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, in the clinical database he'd spent 2 years learning to navigate. A condition, he read, in which sound enters the inner ear normally, but the transmission of signals from the ear to the brain is disrupted or disordered, often misdiagnosed, frequently presenting with audiometric results consistent with sensorineural hearing loss but with a fundamentally different underlying mechanism. Treatment approaches accordingly entirely different. He read for 40 minutes. Then he closed the laptop, sat in the dark office for a long moment, and went to check on his son. Thursday afternoon, Ethan came home to find Clara and Noah in the living room. They were sitting cross-legged on the floor, Clara with her shoes off, Noah in his socks, with a collection of objects spread between them. A small rubber ball, a wooden block, a metal spoon, a sheet of paper folded into quarters. Clara was holding each object in turn, and as she held it, she signed something slowly and deliberately to Noah, then placed the object against different surfaces: the hardwood floor, the glass of the coffee table, the wall. Ethan stood in the doorway and did not announce himself. Clara placed the metal spoon against the hardwood floor and tapped it lightly. The sound it produced was faint, a small, high-frequency ring, delicate and brief. Noah reached out and placed his palm flat on the floor directly beside the spoon. His eyes changed. It was subtle, a slight widening, a quality of heightened attention that was different from his usual focused intelligence, more like the involuntary, unguarded surprise of someone receiving unexpected information, as if something had arrived that he hadn't known to anticipate. Clara turned and found Ethan in the doorway. Her expression shifted, not with guilt exactly, but with the careful composure of someone who had anticipated this moment and prepared a response. "Vibro-tactile exploration," she said, before he could speak. "Feeling sound through surfaces. It's a standard sensory engagement technique. Dr. Ames doesn't use that approach." "I know." She held his gaze. "Different practitioners use different methods." Something tightened in his chest. The familiar compound of hope and restraint that Noah's situation had educated him, at considerable cost, to manage. He had learned to be careful with hope. Hope had a way of constructing itself into something that looked solid, right up until a clinical report disassembled it in 2 paragraphs of precise, measured language. "Clara." He said her first name for the first time without the formal prefix, and something in the room acknowledged this shift in a way that neither of them addressed. "What are you seeing?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at Noah, who had moved the spoon to the glass tabletop and was pressing his palm to it with absorbed, unhurried concentration. Then she looked back at Ethan, and the controlled professional expression did something he hadn't yet seen it do. It opened just slightly. "Enough. I'm not certain yet," she said. "I don't want to tell you something that isn't accurate." He recognized this, the specific precision of a person who had learned, at some particular cost he didn't yet know the shape of, to be careful with words that carried weight. "Tell me what you suspect," he said. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Noah tapped the spoon gently against the glass again, and again pressed his palm flat against the surface, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone discovering something that had always been there, waiting. "I think Noah's audiological assessment needs to be repeated," Clara said carefully, "by someone who approaches it without a predetermined conclusion." The words landed in the room with the specific weight of something that had been waiting to be said. "You're suggesting the diagnosis is wrong," Ethan said. His voice was level. "I'm suggesting the diagnosis may be incomplete." She met his eyes directly. "Those are different things, but yes, I think they're worth distinguishing." In the silence that followed, Noah tapped the spoon once more, pressed his small hand to the glass, and looked up at Clara with an expression that, even across the room, even filtered through everything Ethan had taught himself about managing hope, looked extraordinarily dangerously like wonder. The conversation about the audiogram became the first real argument. It didn't start as one. It began Friday morning quietly, the way disagreements between 2 people who are both accustomed to controlling their environments tend to begin, framed professionally, heated personally, neither side willing to acknowledge the temperature until it was already past manageable. "I need you to understand something." Ethan set his phone face down on the kitchen counter, which was the gesture his assistant had learned to read, as this meeting is now the only meeting. "Noah has been assessed by 4 independent specialists over the past 6 years. Dr. Pendleton at the Weiss Institute is considered one of the leading pediatric audiologists in the country. His team used every current diagnostic protocol available." "I understand that." Clara poured her coffee without looking at him. "And I'm not questioning Dr. Pendleton's credentials. Then what exactly are you questioning?" She set the coffee pot down and turned to face him with the directness that he was learning to expect from her, and had not yet learned to be fully prepared for. "I'm questioning whether a diagnosis made when Noah was 3 months old, using the technology and protocols available in 2018, has been comprehensively revisited, using current understanding of conditions that present similarly, but respond to completely different interventions. It has been revisited multiple times. Has it been revisited by anyone who was specifically looking for auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder?" The silence that followed this question was different from the silences that usually filled the apartment. This one had a shape to it. "ANSD presents with audiometric results that can be indistinguishable from sensorineural hearing loss using standard pure tone testing," she continued, her voice remaining even. "The distinction requires ABR testing, auditory brainstem response, analyzed with a specific focus on the neural transmission pathway, not just the cochlear response. If that distinction was never specifically sought, how do you know this?" The question came out sharper than he intended. She stopped. In the small pause that followed, something flickered across her face, quickly controlled, quickly gone. "I read about it," she said. "Clara, She met his eyes. "You have a graduate degree in pediatric audiology," he said. "You co-authored a paper on auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder at the Harrington Institute in 2020. You left the field in 2021 under circumstances that aren't listed in your application." He watched her face remain carefully, precisely still. "I want to know why you're standing in my kitchen as a housekeeper instead of practicing the specialty you spent years training in." The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, at an angle that caught the stillness of her expression with particular clarity. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment, the look of someone deciding not whether to speak but how much of the truth speaking required. "That's a long answer," she said finally. "I have time." "I don't." She picked up her bag from the counter. "Noah's speech therapy is at 4. I need to take him to the park first. He doesn't settle well if he goes directly from the apartment to the clinic." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "I'll answer your questions, Mr. Calloway, but not when you're asking them like an interrogation." She left the kitchen with the same unhurried composure she brought to everything, and he stood at the counter staring at the space where she'd been and recognizing, with the specific discomfort of self-awareness, that she was right about the tone. He picked up his phone and called Patrick. "The Harrington Institute," he said, 2020 and 2021. "I need everything, faculty records, any incidents, any disputes, any departures that year." The park that Friday afternoon was the kind of late October New York day that arrived like an apology for the summer, cool and clear and generous with light. The trees in the long stretch of Central Park doing their annual extravagant work in amber and copper and deep red. Ethan arrived 40 minutes into the outing, having cleared his 2 o'clock call with the specific efficiency of a man with motivation. He found Clara and Noah on a bench near the model boat pond. Noah standing at the water's edge with his shoes off and his socks tucked into Clara's bag, his bare feet on the stone ledge, the posture of a child doing exactly what he wanted, and entirely certain of his right to do it. Clara was watching Noah the way she watched everything, with complete attention and without any visible projection onto what she was seeing. Not anxious, not wistful, present. She heard Ethan approach and moved her bag to make room on the bench without turning around. He sat. "He likes the vibration of the stone when boats pass," she said. Ethan looked at his son, who was watching a remote-controlled sailboat cross the pond with the focused pleasure of someone receiving a gift they didn't know they'd been waiting for. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said, "for this morning." The tone was wrong. A pause. "Yes, it was. I'm not accustomed to—" He stopped. "That's not an explanation. I was abrupt and it wasn't warranted." Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Noah. Then she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen, without reacting until I'm finished." He looked at her. "The paper I co-authored at Harrington was the preliminary framework for a diagnostic protocol that could have changed how ANSD is identified in infants. The lead researcher was my graduate supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb. He was brilliant and he was thorough, and he presented our work to an advisory board funded by 2 major hospital networks and the Calloway Foundation." She said the last 2 words without any particular emphasis, which was itself a kind of emphasis. 3 weeks after that presentation, Dr. Webb was removed from the program. The research was reclassified as internal property of the Harrington Institute. My graduate status was terminated on grounds of academic misconduct. The misconduct was fabricated. The model sailboat crossed the pond. Noah's feet pressed against the stone as the small wake reached the ledge, and something in his face, small, private, entirely his own, shifted. "The Calloway Foundation," Ethan said. "Your father serves on their advisory board, has for 15 years. She kept her eyes on Noah. "I'm not telling you this to accuse you of anything. You were 32 and running Calloway Industries and presumably had no knowledge of a graduate research dispute at a private institution. I'm telling you because you asked why I left, and that's the answer, and you deserve the honest version." Ethan was quiet for a long time. A second sailboat entered the pond. Noah's posture changed in the way it always did when he was receiving sensory information he found meaningful, a particular stillness, a gathering of attention. "Why didn't you fight it?" Ethan asked. "I did fight it." The words were simple and flat, and carried the specific weight of something that had long since finished being raw. "For 8 months. I filed complaints with the institute, with the university, with the state licensing board. Everything I filed was reviewed by people who received funding from the same network of donors who had reason to bury the research. I ran out of money. I ran out of professional standing, and I had to decide between continuing to fight a system with unlimited resources and starting over in a position where I could still do something useful. She paused. I chose Noah. I chose work like this, with children who needed the kind of attention that doesn't require a license. You chose Noah, Ethan repeated quietly. She glanced at him, and something shifted between them in the afternoon light, something that neither of them named, that sat in the space between the sentence and the silence that followed it, specific and undeniable. I need you to understand something, Clara said. I came here for Noah because I looked at his case summary. The agency shared it as a standard briefing for candidates, and I saw things in it that I've seen before. I'm not here to pursue a legal case against your family. I'm not here to complicate your life. I am genuinely here because your son may have been living in the wrong diagnosis for 6 years, and if I'm right about what I'm seeing, there are things that can be done, things that couldn't have been done before, with protocols that didn't exist in 2018. A third sailboat. Noah turned on the stone ledge and found Ethan's face and signed, Dad, feel this. He was pointing at the ledge, at the stone vibrating faintly with the displacement of water. Ethan crossed to the ledge and crouched beside his son and placed his hand on the stone. He felt the faint, persistent tremor of the pond's surface transmitted through 10 feet of solid ground. He looked at Noah, who was watching his face with the specific, intent attention of a child, waiting for their parent to understand something important. I feel it, Ethan signed. Noah smiled with the unguarded completeness that Ethan had spent 6 years learning to receive without letting it undo him entirely. Then he pointed at Clara and signed, She showed me. Ethan looked back at the bench. Clara was watching both of them with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, careful and open and something adjacent to hope, held at a professional distance that was, he suspected, costing her more than she would acknowledge. He stood up. I want to have Noah re-evaluated, he said. I want a specialist who is specifically qualified in ANSD, not affiliated with the Weiss Institute, and not connected to any institution that receives Callaway Foundation funding. He paused. I want you to help me find one. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, with the contained gravity of someone receiving a commitment they hadn't entirely trusted themselves to hope for. I know exactly who to call, she said. Behind them, Noah was still pressing his small hand to the stone ledge, feeling the world through the part of it that reached him, patient and unhurried, waiting for the rest. The shadows of the copper trees stretched long across the water, and somewhere in the distance a boat horn sounded over the city's permanent murmur, and Ethan Callaway stood beside his son in the October light and felt, with the particular precision of a man unaccustomed to being surprised, that something in his life had just changed direction. He didn't know yet how completely. But the woman on the bench, who was already writing a name in her small notepad with the careful certainty of someone who had been waiting a long time to write it, did. Dr. Serena Okafor had a waiting list 14 months long, an office on the 23rd floor of a building in Midtown that had nothing to do with any hospital network or foundation, and a reputation that the academic community described, depending on who was speaking, as either indispensable or inconvenient. She had published the definitive clinical framework for ANSD rediagnosis in 2022. She had also, notably, testified before a state medical ethics board in 2021 regarding research suppression practices at 2 affiliated private institutions, and the testimony had not made her popular with the networks that funded a significant portion of pediatric audiology in the northeastern United States. Clara had trained under her for 6 months before the Harrington situation. She called her on a Saturday morning from the hallway outside Noah's room, keeping her voice low and her back to the apartment. Serena picked up on the second ring. I wondered when you'd surface, she said. Where are you? Manhattan. I'm working as a household employee for a family with a 6-year-old who's been carrying a sensorineural diagnosis for 3 years. I've been observing him for a week, and I think we're looking at ANSD, possibly auditory neuropathy with dyssynchrony. His vibrotactile responses are strong and differentiated. His ABRs, if he's ever had specific neural pathway mapping, I haven't seen the full data yet. A pause. Who's the family? Callaway. Another pause. Longer this time. Ethan Callaway. Yes. Clara. The word carried the specific weight of someone who had opinions about the situation and was deciding how many of them to deliver at once. You understand what you're walking into. I understand what I'm walking out of if I don't try. This child has been living in the wrong framework for 6 years, Serena. He's 6. If we can get ahead of it now, I'll see him. Send me everything you have. The appointment was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Ethan cleared his entire morning. His assistant, accustomed to an executive calendar that treated every hour as load-bearing, rearranged 4 meetings and a conference call with a precision born of considerable practice. Tuesday evening, Ethan's mother arrived without calling ahead. Victoria Calloway operated on the founding principle that arrival without announcement was a privilege of people whose love entitled them to it, and she had spent 64 years applying this principle to every relationship she considered important. She swept through the penthouse entry hall in the particular way that expensive coats swept when their wearers had decided the entrance mattered, and found her grandson first, Noah, in the living room with Clara, the two of them working through what appeared to be an elaborate sorting system involving small colored tiles on the coffee table. "Darling," Victoria said with the warm, overprojected clarity of someone who had never learned, across 6 years of visiting, that volume was not the relevant variable with Noah. Noah looked up, identified his grandmother, and signed a greeting with the patient, diplomatic composure of a person managing a relationship that had always required more from him than it gave. Victoria turned to Clara with the expression she reserved for household staff, civil, impersonal, and fractionally too evaluating for complete courtesy. "You must be the new girl, Clara Bennett." Clara stood without hurry and offered her hand. "Mrs. Calloway." Victoria shook it briefly, her gaze moving over Clara's face with the rapid competence of a woman who had spent decades cataloging people's qualities and filing them under headings. Something in what she found gave her a fractional pause that she covered with a turn toward Ethan, who had appeared in the hallway. "We need to talk," Victoria said to her son. "We do," he agreed. "Clara, would you take Noah for his bath?" Clara gathered the tiles without comment. Noah followed her down the hallway, and just before he turned the corner, he looked back at his grandmother with the specific, measuring expression of a child who understood more than the adults in the room intended him to. "Richard Harmon called me," Victoria said when the hallway was clear. She settled into the armchair with the efficiency of a woman who considered sitting a tactical choice. "He said you've been requesting access to Noah's audiological records through channels outside the Weiss Institute." "I have." "Ethan," she used the particular inflection, 2 syllables, moderate weight, precisely placed, that she had been using since his childhood to indicate that she considered his current position poorly reasoned and herself prepared to explain why. "The Weiss Institute has managed Noah's care for 5 years, Dr. Pendleton is the most respected. Is the Calloway Foundation still funding the Institute's pediatric research program?" She paused. "The foundation supports many institutions. It's not yes or no." Victoria looked at him with the complex expression of a woman confronting a conversation she had believed, until this moment, she was prepared for. "Yes, the annual commitment was renewed in September. And the Harrington Institute, are we still on their advisory board?" A longer pause. Ethan watched his mother's face and saw the moment when she understood precisely what was behind the questions. "That's not a simple, Mother." His voice was even, entirely controlled, and carried the particular weight of someone who has spent a week reading documents and arriving at conclusions he did not enjoy. "Did you know about the research suppression in 2021? The graduate researchers whose work was reclassified and whose careers were dismantled to protect a diagnostic framework that kept the Foundation's institutional relationships uncomplicated. The silence that fell between them had a quality that their silences did not usually have, something older and more serious than their habitual differences of opinion. I became aware of some of it," Victoria said carefully, "after the fact. And you said nothing to me. You had just taken full control of the company. Your father's health was—" She stopped. "I made a judgment about timing." "You made a judgment," Ethan said, "that cost a woman her career and may have cost my son 6 years of his life." He said this without raising his voice, which was, he suspected, the reason it landed with the particular force it did. Victoria said nothing for a long moment. Outside the windows, the Manhattan skyline held its usual indifference to the conversations conducted in its presence. "Who is she?" Victoria asked finally. "Someone who came here for Noah." He stood. "The appointment is Wednesday. I'd like you not to interfere with it." "Ethan, the Foundation's relationship with Harrington and the Weiss Institute will need to be reviewed. I'll be handling that review personally." He moved toward the hallway. "I'll have Patrick call you a car." Wednesday morning, Dr. Okafor's office. Noah sat in the examination chair with the self-possession of a child who had spent a significant portion of his 6 years in examination rooms and had formed his opinions about them. He tolerated the preliminary observations with dignity, and the electrode placement for the ABR with the resigned patience of someone who had been through worse. Clara sat in the chair beside him, close enough that he could reach her arm, which he did approximately twice in the first 20 minutes, and then appeared to decide was no longer necessary. Ethan stood near the door. He watched Clara watch Noah, and tried to separate what he was observing from what he was feeling, which was a task he had generally been competent at for most of his adult life, and was discovering, in this particular room on this particular morning, that he was considerably less skilled at than he had believed. She had told him her story on a bench in Central Park. She had told him the part of it that intersected with his family, and then kept the rest. The full cost of it, the years of it, the daily texture of having been erased from the field she'd built her life toward, behind the same careful composure she brought to everything. He had no idea what that composure required from her. He was beginning to understand that it required more than he had originally calculated. Dr. Okafor emerged from the testing room after 90 minutes with the expression of a clinician whose findings have confirmed something she considered important. "I'd like to discuss the results with both of you," she said. "Both of you." She looked at Ethan, then at Clara, and said it in a way that made clear she considered them, for the purposes of this conversation, a unit. They sat across from her desk. "Noah's ABR results show a pattern consistent with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder," Dr. Okafor said, with the measured directness of someone who understood that the people in front of her had been waiting, in different ways, for a long time for this sentence. Specifically, his cochlear hair cell function appears relatively intact. The disruption is in the auditory nerve transmission. This is a different mechanism than sensorineural loss, and it responds to different interventions. Ethan's hands on the desk in front of him were very still. "What interventions?" he said. "Cochlear implants, which were correctly ruled out, for the wrong reasons. The decision happened to be right, but the diagnostic basis was incomplete. What I am recommending is an auditory brainstem implant evaluation, combined with an intensive speech-language program specifically designed for ANSD. There is also a relatively recent protocol," she glanced at Clara, "one that draws on research developed at Harrington before 2021, which shows significant results in children Noah's age when the diagnosis is made early enough." "Is 6 early enough?" Ethan asked. "It's not ideal," Dr. Okafor said honestly, "but it is not too late." The room was very quiet. Ethan turned to look at Clara, who was looking at her hands on the desk, and whose composure was doing the specific, difficult work of composure that has arrived at the edge of what it can contain. Her jaw was set. Her shoulders were level. Her hands, he noticed, were pressed flat against the desk as if the desk were a surface she needed to feel, needed the solid certainty of, at this particular moment. "Clara," he said, quietly. She looked up. Her eyes were clear and controlled and held. At the very back of them, the particular brightness of someone who has spent 4 years waiting to hear that they were right, and finding that being right does not, in fact, feel the way you expected it to. "You were right," he said, "about all of it." She nodded once, precise and small, and looked back down at her hands and did not say anything else. He reached across the desk and placed his hand over hers. She went very still. He did not remove his hand, and neither did she. The hospital network board meeting was on a Thursday, 6 days after Dr. Okafor's appointment, and Ethan arrived 12 minutes early and left the meeting room 40 minutes later with 2 resignations, a foundation audit underway, and the specific, weightless clarity of a man who has spent years letting certain things remain unexamined and has stopped. He called Patrick from the car. "The Harrington matter," he said. "I want our legal team to reach out to every researcher and graduate student who was affected by the 2021 reclassification. I want an independent review of the original research, and I want to understand what pathway exists to restore academic standing where it was wrongfully removed." "Understood," Patrick said. Then after a beat, "There's something else, sir. Diana Hargrove's attorney called this morning. She's filed a motion to revisit the custody arrangement for Noah." Ethan was quiet. "The grounds?" "She's claiming that recent changes to Noah's care environment constitute a material change in circumstances warranting review." A pause. Her attorney specifically referenced the new household staff. He told Clara that evening. They were in the kitchen, the specific kind of late-evening kitchen occupation that had gradually become its own category of time in the apartment, neither professional nor entirely something else, existing in a space that neither of them had agreed to name. Noah was in bed. The city outside was doing its 10 o'clock version of itself. all contained energy and cold light. Clara received the information about Diana's motion with the still processing quality she brought to serious things. She set down her tea. "She wants to use me as grounds," she said. It was not a question. Her attorney is framing it as instability in Noah's care environment. She'll argue that an unvetted household employee with an unconventional professional history represents a risk. Clara was quiet for a moment. She can't actually win that argument. The courts won't remove a child from a stable primary home on that basis. No, but she can create enough procedural noise to delay Noah's treatment program while the motion is active. Months, potentially. He watched her face. And she will, if it suits her. Diana's relationship with Noah has never been about Noah. Something moved across Clara's expression. The specific, controlled anger of a person who has learned to be precise about what they do with anger, because imprecision has cost them before. "What do you know about her?" Clara asked. "Diana Hargrove. We were engaged 3 years ago. She called off the engagement 4 months before the wedding when it became clear that my commitment to Noah's care would be, in her words, an ongoing priority conflict." He said this with the flat, even tone of something that had long since been filed under lessons of verifiable cost. "She's been in London for the past year. The custody motion is not about Noah. Then what is it about?" He looked at her steadily. "You're asking me that?" She held his gaze. He watched something move behind her eyes, the thing she'd been keeping at a professional distance with the careful discipline of a woman who had learned what happened when she trusted something, and the ground turned out not to be solid. The self-protective intelligence of it was entirely visible to him because he recognized it. He had been practicing a version of it himself for approximately 3 years. Ethan. She used his first name the way he'd used hers. Once, deliberately, with the full weight of deliberateness. "I know," he said. "I came here for Noah. I know that too. And what's happening between us it's a complication I didn't plan for, and I'm not sure I'm—" She stopped, pressed her palm flat against the kitchen counter in the gesture he'd noticed from the beginning, the reaching for solid ground. "I had a life that made sense. I had a direction. It was taken from me by people who had more power than I did, and I built something else, something that was smaller, but was mine, and I am careful about what I let matter, because I know what it costs when the things that matter are used against you." He didn't move. He let the full weight of what she'd said occupy the room which it deserved. "I understand," he said. "I am not going to use anything you've trusted me with against you, and I understand if that's not enough, if there's no amount of saying it that makes it safe to believe. I know what my family's name has meant in your life." He was quiet for a moment. "But I need you to know that I'm not asking you to take that on faith. I'm asking you to let me show you." Clara looked at him for a long time. "Diana's motion," she said finally. "How do we handle it?" The deliberate change of subject was itself an answer. Not the answer he was hoping for exactly, but an answer that meant she was still in the room, still in this, still choosing to move forward alongside him rather than back toward the distance she knew how to maintain. He accepted it. He would take careful and slow over nothing. "My legal team is already responding, but the strongest defense is the one that makes her motion factually irrelevant." He leaned forward slightly. "If we move forward with Noah's treatment under Dr. Okafor, the medical record will document a legitimate diagnosis and a qualified care approach. Diana's argument loses its surface before it gets to a hearing. And if she escalates, then we have a conversation about what position you'd like to hold in Noah's care formally, not just practically, and what documentation supports that position." He paused. "I've looked into reinstatement pathways at the State Board. For wrongful license actions, it's not fast, but it's possible." Clara's expression shifted, the slow, controlled opening of something that had been closed for a long time. "You looked into that last week. You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure it was my place to say something until I knew if there was something worth saying." She was quiet for a moment that had a different quality than their previous silences, warmer somehow and more complicated. "Marcus Webb," she said, "my supervisor at Harrington. He had the original research data backed up on an independent server. He sent me copies before they revoked his access. I've had them for 4 years." She met Ethan's eyes. "I never did anything with them because I didn't have the standing or the resources to do anything with them, and because the people I'd have been filing against were protected by the same network that destroyed my complaint the first time. They're not protected by that network anymore," he said. She absorbed this. Something in her face, The specific, careful composure she'd been maintaining since the first morning in his kitchen shifted in a way that reminded him of what Noah's face had done at the park, the involuntary, unguarded movement of someone receiving something they had stopped letting themselves expect. "Ethan," her voice was very quiet. "What are you doing?" "Fixing something my family broke," he said. "And everything else?" "I'm doing that separately because it deserves to be separate, and because you deserve to know the difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The city outside was very still for a city that was never actually still. "I need time," she said. "I know. I'm not saying no. I know that too." He stood, gave her the space the moment required. "Noah's first session with Dr. Okafor's speech program is Monday morning. I'd like you there." "I'll be there," she said. He was at the kitchen doorway when she said, "Ethan." He turned. "Thank you." The two words were simple and carried more inside them than two words generally had room for. He nodded once and went down the hallway, and she stayed at the kitchen counter for a while after, both palms flat against the marble, feeling the solid fact of it, breathing carefully in the quiet. 3 days later, Patrick placed a folder on Ethan's desk. "The Harrington Review," he said. "The original research, Dr. Webb's protocol, is fully intact. Our legal team says the academic misconduct findings against Ms. Bennett can be challenged with a high probability of reversal." Ethan opened the folder, skimmed the summary. "And Diana's motion. Her attorney withdrew it this morning. Apparently her evidence base was thinner than anticipated." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "One more thing," Patrick said. "Dr. Webb called. He said Ms. Bennett would know who he was, and that he's been waiting 4 years for someone to call him. He left his number." Ethan wrote it down and then held the paper for a moment. Then he walked down the hall to find Clara. Noah said his first word on a Tuesday in November, 8 weeks into Dr. Okafor's protocol. It was not announced. There was no clinical setting, no observer with a clipboard, no structured moment of therapeutic achievement. It happened in the kitchen on an ordinary morning, while Clara was making oatmeal, the only variety Noah had ever accepted without a preliminary expression of constitutional objection, and Ethan was reading through contract revisions at the counter. And the November light was doing what November light does in Manhattan when it decides to be generous. Noah walked in, looked at the oatmeal, looked at Clara, and said, "More." Not clearly, not cleanly. A sound approximating the word, shaped by a mouth learning to form things it had always known it wanted to say, textured and imperfect and entirely unmistakable. Clara turned from the stove very slowly. Ethan set down the contract. Noah looked between them with the expression of someone who has done something significant and is waiting to see if the room will acknowledge it appropriately. Clara crouched to his level. Her voice, when she found it, was carefully even. "More," she said back to him, making the sound gently, giving him the shape of it. Noah looked at her mouth, then at her eyes. Then he said it again, a little clearer, a little more confident, the way things come out the second time when you've survived the risk of the first. "More." Ethan put one hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling and did not make a sound. Clara signed to Noah. "That was perfect, you did that." Noah, with the specific satisfaction of a person whose opinion of himself has just been confirmed by external evidence, turned back to the oatmeal and pointed at it with the imperious patience of a child who has said his piece and now expects the world to catch up. Clara stood and served the oatmeal and did not turn around for a moment, and when she did, her eyes were clear and her chin was level, and she was entirely composed, except for the fact that she was visibly, irreversibly, quietly undone in the specific way of people who have hoped for something carefully and at great personal cost and are meeting it. Finally here, Ethan crossed the kitchen. He didn't say anything. He put his hand on her shoulder, simple, steady, entirely serious. She put her hand over his. Noah ate his oatmeal. The state licensing board's review was completed in February. The finding was unanimous. The academic misconduct action against Clara M. Bennett had been initiated on fabricated grounds, had been sustained through conflicts of interest at the reviewing level, and was hereby formally reversed and expunged from the record. Dr. Marcus Webb's research was simultaneously restored to its original academic standing and submitted, with Webb's authorization, for publication in the Journal of Pediatric Audiology, with both authors listed. Ethan was in the hallway outside his office when the notification came through, and he walked directly to wherever Clara was, which was the living room, working through Noah's at-home exercises with him. He held the phone out to her without saying anything. She read it once, then again. She handed the phone back with a steady hand and looked out the window for a long moment. Noah signed. "What is it?" Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she signed. "Good news. Very old good news." Noah considered this. Then, "Is that why your eyes are doing that?" She made the specific sound that Ethan had come to identify as Clara's version of laughing, when she had decided that laughing was appropriate, a soft, real, unperformed thing that lived at the back of her throat and arrived without announcement. Yes, that's exactly why. He asked her on a Saturday in March. It was not in a restaurant or on a rooftop or in any of the elevated settings his mother had suggested in the weeks since she had revised her opinion of Clara, with the thoroughness of a woman who considered changing her mind a mark of intelligence rather than inconsistency. Victoria Calloway had, in those same weeks, commissioned a review of the Foundation's institutional relationships, provided a formal statement to the licensing board's investigation, and begun sitting on the floor of the living room to work through Noah's tile exercises with him, badly and enthusiastically and with the particular joy of someone discovering, at 64, that there were still things to learn. It was in the kitchen, the same kitchen where everything had started, where the first difficult mornings had gradually become something else, where oatmeal had become a symbol of all the ordinary, irreplaceable things that accumulate into a life. He asked her directly, as he did everything, "I want to build something with you that doesn't require either of us to perform anything we don't actually feel. I want you to come back to your work, your real work, not as a courtesy or a rescue, but because the field needs you and you know that. And I know that, and Noah knows that, even if he currently expresses it by demanding you be present at every session." A pause. "And I want to ask you to marry me, and I want it to be its own thing, separate from everything else, decided on its own terms." Clara looked at him. She said, "That was a very long way to ask a question. I had a lot of context to establish." "You really did." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with the full, clear attention she gave to things she considered genuinely important. "Yes," she said, "on all of it." He let out a breath that he had not quite realized he'd been holding. "Also," she said, "your ring is in the top kitchen drawer." He stopped. "How do you know about the ring?" "Patrick told me. He felt I should have advance notice." A pause. "He said you'd been carrying it around for 3 weeks and losing it in various drawers." She tilted her head slightly. He seemed to consider this endearing. "I'm choosing to agree with him. I'm going to speak to Patrick about the limits of his role." "Please don't. He's the only reason this household functions." She accepted the ring with the steady hands of a woman who had decided, at some point in the past months, to stop protecting herself from the things she actually wanted, and looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone who has spent a long time waiting for solid ground, and has found it. "It's beautiful. It was my grandmother's. She was difficult and brilliant and argued with everyone who wasn't paying close enough attention." He paused. "I thought it was appropriate." Clara laughed. The real version, unguarded and warm. From down the hallway, Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks, with the radar of a child who has determined that interesting things happen in kitchens and has adjusted his habits accordingly. He looked at his father. He looked at Clara. He looked at the ring. Then he signed, with the deliberate, exacting precision of a person making an official record. Finally, Ethan looked at his 6-year-old son. "How long have you known?" Noah's expression conveyed, with considerable dignity, that this was not a question worth answering. Clara was still laughing when she slid the ring onto her finger and held out her other hand to Noah, who crossed the kitchen and took it, and then took Ethan's and stood between them in the morning light with the complete, unhurried satisfaction of someone whose world had finally arranged itself into the right shape. What became of the others? Diana Hargrove returned to London permanently following the withdrawal of her custody motion. Her attorney's invoice, Ethan later learned, had gone unpaid for 6 months. She did not contact the family again. Victoria Calloway appeared unexpectedly in the front row at Noah's first public speech therapy milestone event in April, and cried in the precise, dignified way of someone who had not intended to cry but had decided, upon finding herself crying, that it was the right response. She and Clara reached an understanding that was never explicitly discussed and required no ceremony. The understanding of 2 people who love the same child and have decided that this is sufficient common ground to build on. She remained difficult and brilliant and slightly too present, and everyone adapted. Marcus Webb published the full ANSD protocol in June under both names, to significant professional attention. He called Clara the morning the paper went live, and they spoke for 40 minutes, and Ethan did not ask what was said, and Clara did not volunteer it, which was itself a kind of completeness. Webb joined the newly restructured Callaway Foundation's Research Advisory Board in the fall. Patrick was given a raise. He accepted it with the neutral professionalism of a man who had expected it and considered the timing reasonable. Dr. Serena Okafor presented the Noah Callaway case, anonymized, at a National Pediatric Audiology Conference in the fall as a demonstration of diagnostic protocol revision outcomes. The paper was cited 11 times in its first month. She sent Clara a copy of every citation, which Clara kept in a folder in her desk at the clinic she opened with Webb in September. Noah said his first complete sentence at a speech session in May. He said, "I hear you." He was looking at Clara when he said it. He was also in the particular way of 6-year-olds who have decided something is true and don't see the need to be subtle about it, looking at his father. They were in the same room. They were always now in the same room, the three of them, or some combination of the three of them, arranged in the comfortable, permanent way of people who have chosen each other and arrived at the unhurried certainty that the choice was right. The city outside went on with its permanent business of noise and light and weather. Inside the clinic, in the morning that was simply a morning and also the first day of everything that came after, Noah Callaway sat between the two people who had found each other through him, and because of him, pressed his small palm flat against the vibrating surface of the therapy table and listened. And the world which had been waiting for him came in.
Som aqui comigo? Aqui? É.